Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is from the incredible mind of Peter Harrington once again, and I'm sure you guys can sink your teeth into this one. Of course, as ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMTsCryptidCrew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story. Entitled, When the Riverman comes down from the mountain, the people of my town board their windows and lock their doors. Let's get straight into that. The end of summer is the rainy season in my small town. The river gets high and the leaves in the trees turn a deep green. And down the river is a small wooden hut. The people of my town wait in horror for the smoke to rise from its chimney. Maybe it occurs in early July or the end of September. But when we see the smoke rising from the trees, we know that the Riverman has come down from the mountain to his home by the water. A little is known about the Riverman. We know that he spends most of his time up in the mountains, but nobody knows where. Some have run into him when they have hiked deep into the wilderness, but his residential whereabouts remain unknown. When his chimney smoke turns from grey to green, all that is known is that you don't want to be caught out in the streets that night. Now, my town sits next to the river in the valley between two mountain ranges. Its population is no more than 500 people, and on the day that the smoke turns green, chaos erupts down the small main street. People frantically board up their windows and reinforce their doors. They remove anything valuable from the streets and bring it into their homes. The gas station closes early, and by the time the sun sets, not a soul remains outdoors, and the streets are quiet. Sometimes the crime begins soon after dark, and sometimes it starts in the early hours of the morning, but it always comes. It starts as a low moaning sound in the distance, like the soft hum of a bumblebee. But soon that murmur comes closer and sounds less like moaning and more like the cries of agony. These cries are inhuman, like a soul trapped in a rubber body. When the footsteps can be heard, you can know that a faceless parade is right outside the door. On the windows and doors the knocking begins. The cries of agony almost start to sound like human words when there is only a wall protecting you from what is outside. Often we can hear the sound of breaking glass as car windows are broken. A cacophony of chaos terrorizes this poor, powerless town. This moment of mayhem is only temporary, for soon the horrible parade fades into the night. The sun rises the following morning, and it's all over. The town is trashed, but the Riverman smoke no longer rises from the trees. We all leave our homes, assured that we are safe until this happens again next year. This year, I decided that I was tired of this abuse. The Riverman had come through and destroyed our streets every year, and I want to find out who he was and what sort of beasts he let ravage our town. I had pestered the town elders for years, but they always gave me the same answer. He does what he does, and we don't stop him from that. Well, I am not going to let this generation take his abuse any longer. Tonight will be the end of the Riverman's torments. Today, the Riverman smoke turned from grey to green. Everybody is panicking. Now is the time for me to figure out what the Riverman is up to, once and for all. If I can stop him, I will. I don't know how yet, but I at least need to see what is brought through the town before creating any defense plan. All I want to do is save my town. I will bring you an update tomorrow. Day 2. I don't know how to explain what I saw last night. My very conception of the physical world has been altered, and I am unsure if I can truly trust reality from this point forward. I suppose I must start from the beginning. In the early afternoon, I travelled to the Riverman's cabin. It was about a 45-minute walk from the town, through the thick brush of the forest. Nobody ever ventured this far away from home in this direction, and so I had no idea what to expect. There was a large cliff overlooking the riverfront property, and so I climbed to it to get a view. I stayed under a tree to avoid the light patter of rain. and the first thing I spotted was the cottage itself. It was small, no larger than 1 or 2 rooms, and to the back of the house was a large chimney from where the green flames emanated. Next to the cottage was a large cleared field that bordered a thick brush of trees. There were stakes in the ground across the area, but I couldn't identify what had been planted. And all of a sudden, he appeared. The Riverman was old. A long grey beard covered his face and his hair was mostly gone. He had a large frame and looked quite muscular despite his distinguished years. A loose-fitting white tunic hung from his body and his pants were dirty brown slacks. He wore brown sandals and walked with a sort of a limp. There was something that I liked about the Riverman. He was a stoic man who had a meditative quality about him. I watched him for a while. Each movement he made was deliberate and calculated. Tied around his waist was a sack of white powder that he sprinkled around the field. He sometimes pulled his shovel from his waist and dug something from around the garden. I needed to see what he was growing, and so I decided to wait for the cover of night to further approach the field. The afternoon continued, and the Riverman sprinkled all sorts of powders and liquids over the field. The rain picked up as the sun began to set, and I crept down from a hiding perch on the hill and slowly approached the cottage. It was dark, but it was apparent that there was a pair of something sticking out of the ground next to each stake. I couldn't believe my eyes when I finally saw what they were. What looked like human feet were sticking out of the dirt in front of each stake. Some were fresher than others, yet I couldn't detect a putrid smell, and while some appeared to be rotten, the entire field smelled like fresh flowers. I saw the Riverman from afar. He continued to walk around the field and spread the bizarre mix of items on the grass. I watched him until the twilight turned into a deep night. It was around midnight when he entered the cottage. 10 minutes later, he came back outside wearing what looked to be the garb of a Catholic bishop. He had on a white robe with a tall hat, and in one hand he clutched a sizable golden staff, and in the other he held a laminated sheet of paper. And slowly he walked out into the middle of the death field, holding the golden staff in his hand. He watched in awe as he stood there. A deep look of determination came across his face. "Zukoma Porta," said the Riverman. His chant was a deep booming voice. He shouted lines of incoherent chanting for a moment, and as he chanted, a faint glow began to emerge from the staff. It started as a dim luminescence, but grew into a bright light that almost blinded me. And suddenly he held the staff high above his head and planted it into the ground. The light spread through the field, causing the wooden stakes to burst into flames. I averted my eyes, and great energy hid me in my hiding space, causing me to roll back to the ground, and I lost consciousness. When I finally came to, I looked up to the field to find that it was empty. Where the human legs had been planted, there was nothing but deep holes in the ground. I stood up as quickly as I could and ran in the direction of the town. I had to stop him before he ravaged my home once again. But with whatever power he possessed, there was probably little that I could do. In the distance, I heard that all too familiar moaning. I was more terrifying, considering that I was out in the open, and I didn't have the protection of my family home. The cries of agony penetrated my eardrums, and they were so horrible that I had to hold my tongue to stop myself from participating. Whatever the Riverman had planted, it was in terrible pain. I didn't know whether to feel fear, terror, or both. I quickened my pace and made my way back to town, the cries of agony loudening by the minute. I stood far to the mountainside, trying to stay as far away from the Riverman and the faceless horde as I could. Their pace was slow, and due to their cries, I could tell when I passed them. I was nearly out of breath by the time that I arrived in town. The town was so dark. Usually, I was inside on the night that the Riverman travelled through the town. Being outside, the town looked abandoned. It seemed like nothing had ever lived there. The cries were close, and so I had to act fast. I looked behind me and saw the light in the distance. I had to think quickly, and so I ran to one of the old rock formations near the outskirts of the town. I had a good view of the road and I waited. And soon the light was very bright and the cries were deafening. The Riverman stepped into the clearing, holding a bright light above his head, and behind him a dark silhouette stumbled out from the trees. From where I hid, it was nothing but a dark humanoid figure, but when it walked, it was clear that it was not a living being. It stepped as if it were a marionette, and with long strides and abnormal arm movement. The way it moved made it look like an exterior force was animating it, and its muscles and bones were simply being dragged along. The sight of it made my skin crawl, and I nearly ran in the opposite direction. The others came into view. They all walked as if they were part of a demonic ballroom show. I knew that if I was to save the town, I needed to get a closer look. And I waited for a long time for the horde to enter the town so that I could get behind them and observe these creatures up close. And I followed them, keeping my distance. When it was safe, I left my rocky refuge and snuck to the outskirts of town. I could tell that these creatures had once been humans. Their bodies were still composed of flesh and bones, but these were just shells for a more profound force. Ragged clothes hung from their body. I looked at one from afar and noticed that its eyes glowed the same color as the Riverman's staff. It was not alive at all. It was one of the Riverman's puppets. It was clear that the Riverman did not have perfect control of these creatures. They didn't walk in a straight line. Instead, they moved around the town, banging into the buildings and cars. I saw one trying to claw through a boarded-up window, and another trying to break down a door. There was one emotion driving these beings: malice. They had no drive other than to kill. And by the time that they had left town, the town was a mess, as always. Some car windows had been smashed in and debris covered the streets. I knew that the only thing I could do was to follow to see where they were going. And the Riverman kept forward, walking past the town and up to the direction of a tall mountain. Keeping my distance, I followed the moans. We hiked deep into the woods until the land began to elevate, and it was clear that our destination was the top of the mountain. I struggled to keep my footing as we ascended. The rain fell upon my face as I climbed on all fours, trying to follow them to the peak. The ground turned from dirt to stone, and soon I spotted the horde in the distance. Instead of climbing, the Riverman had rounded them up onto a flat area adjacent to a cave, and I continued to climb, trying to understand what he was doing now. I noticed something odd about the cave. The dark shadow of the cave opening was not affected by the bright light of the staff. It was as if the darkness inside were a thick black substance that no light could penetrate. Once the creatures had been rounded up, the Riverman chanted more incoherent verses. He lifted the staff above his head and slowly lowered it, touching it against the strange darkness of the cave opening. The light from his torch turned from a yellow glow to a bluer glow, and the creature's eyes changed to that color as well. And suddenly, the cave's opening turned from a deep black to a pale blue glow. It appeared as if plasma substance had filled the hole. Various blue shades swirled like a river. One by one, the Riverman directed the creatures into the cave. As they crossed the threshold of the cave's entrance, they disappeared behind the wall of the blue substance. I crawled to a rock cover near the flat. I was near the top when I saw the Riverman direct the last creature into the hole. I thought that I was safe when he turned around and looked at me, and I was spotted. "Do you want to come in with me?" he asked, and I gulped. "I know you've been watching me all day, and I know what you're probably thinking." He had a warm smile on his face. "Why don't you come in with me, and I can show you why I'm doing this?" I had no choice but to trust him. With the powers he possessed, I had no idea what sort of things he could do to me if I defied his instructions. And slowly, I stood up and walked to his direction. I didn't say a word, but simply followed his orders. "There is no need to be scared," he said. "I have this under control. What you will see on the other side may look menacing, but I assure you, I have fought many of these before, and there is no reason why I should fail this time." He winked at me and then walked into the portal, disappearing into the plasma-looking substance. I stood there, terrified. I wondered what was on the other side of this portal, and with a great leap of faith, I walked through the doorway. Going through the portal was an odd sensation, but not uncomfortable. It felt like I was walking through a waterfall, but the water was coming from all directions. Also, it didn't feel like water, but more like a silky substance, almost reticent of wool. When I emerged on the other side, I was inside of a bubble. The Riverman stood there, chewing on what looked like a glowing carrot, and all around us was an incredible landscape, utterly alien to anything I had ever encountered. "You stay here," he said. "I want you to observe me so that you can learn how to do this yourself." So did I? Shh! He cut me off and turned in the other direction. "You're about to see a lurker, a terrifying creature." Well, his horrid parade was all too clear to me now. Their skins were no longer the colour of rot. They were now the same blue that glowed from his torch. He bit off the rest of the glowing carrot, and his skin began to turn blue as well. He walked through the exterior of the bubble and joined the parade. As I looked around me, the world we were in began to resemble our own, except it looked like a demon had tried to recreate our own world from a tortured soul's memory. It was a landscape very similar to the valley, except the colours were all mismatched. Colours appeared to me that I didn't even know my mind could comprehend. The sky was filled with what looked like clouds, but they were Euclidean geometric shapes. The trees looked like wax flagpoles, and the grass looked like foam. The Riverman stood outside the bubble and waited. The creatures were in a better formation now, and they waited for something. The time moved strangely in this place, and I wasn't sure if a minute or 5 hours had passed, but in the distance it came into view. A black creature, with lengthy appendices, came into view. The lurker was at least 30 feet tall and walked on all fours. The majority of its body was the 4 long legs that strode forward. Its face was a massive white oval, and with 3 black holes comprising its 2 eyes and its mouth. Its features were the reverse of what was beautiful in our world. It was a parody of the human face, a mockery. And it strode closer, and the Riverman called out. I didn't know what he was saying, but I could tell he was calling his parade into positions. Obscure words came from his mouth, and his horde of creatures began running in the direction of the beast. They all formed into an arrowhead-running formation. The creature recoiled, preparing for battle. And suddenly, the Riverman banged his staff against the ground, and 2 of his creatures jumped up into the air and landed on the lurker. They began gnawing on its arms close to the joints as it struggled to shake them, and 2 others jumped and started munching on the lurker's hind legs, while 4 of the Riverman's creatures began gnawing on each foot. More of the Riverman's creatures took their place. The lurker lifted one of its legs off the ground and squashed several creatures under its foot. Back and forth, the creatures battled the lurker for dominance until one of the lurker's legs had been thoroughly chewed through and fell to the ground. It let out a massive scream. The scream sounded as if an elephant had ingested helium. It was angrier now and began to struggle further. It thrashed around, stepping on and puncturing many of the Riverman's creatures. I looked over at the Riverman and saw his face turn pale. He then grabbed something from his sack. It was a small silver circular device. Several round holes were near the top to allow for a substance to be poured in. He filled these with a green powder and then said some words into it. And suddenly a tremendous green smoke began to emanate from the ball, and he ran in the direction of the lurker. With all of his might, he threw the silver ball in its direction, and with the ball landing directly below the lurker's face, the smoke covered its body, and the creature began to wobble. Then the Riverman joined several of his creatures, and taking his staff and jabbing it into another leg. With that, the lurker lost its stability and fell to the ground. It was over. The Riverman sat down on all fours. He waved his staff and the blue light dimmed, and as the light dimmed, his creatures turned into dust. He rested for a while and then stood up and walked in my direction. I'm getting too old for this, he said as he entered the bubble. His skin returned to a normal colour. I don't have too much time left, and we have been looking for someone to fill my slot. We at the Society have had our eyes on you for quite some time. I stood there, flabbergasted. You want to recruit me? To do what? We live in only one of many universes. He rested his arms on his staff. Our universe is rich with a substance called consciousness. Consciousness is very precious in the expanse of multiple universes. He paused for a moment to rub his eyes. Often, the fabric separating this universe from others is ripped. Beings from other universes, such as the Lurkers, try to enter our universe and consume consciousness. I work for a secret society, the Society of Mortier, and we protect our little world from these beings who want to feed on our very existence. I couldn't think of any words to say. I think that you would be a good candidate. He reached out his hand to me in a gesture of friendship. Day 3. I write this to you now from the Riverman's house by the water. He is preparing me to go on a several-month voyage with him into other dimensions and universes to save humanity. I now know that a lurker is nothing compared to the even more horrid beings trying to destroy our world. He tells me of unfathomable creatures and worlds that he and I will face as we protect humanity from the eternal threat. I feel silly now, thinking that the Riverman was evil, but our town was simply the only way to get from his zombie farm to the portal. He was protecting us from the true evil. I now know that to save the town and everybody that I love, I must join the Riverman and his cause. This may be the last you hear from me, but I wanted to share my story before dropping off the grid forever. I have to admit, I didn't realize saving the town would be so horrifying, but I know this must be done. Please, wish me luck. Wow. Certainly another one. Wow. What a refreshing and awesome sort of sci-fi zombie horror there from the incredible mind of Peter Harrington, once again from over on Reddit No Sleep. Huge thank you, Peter, for allowing me to narrate this incredible story on the show. You have an immense amount of talent, and I definitely look forward to more of your work in the future. And of course, I hope you enjoy my rendition. Well, guys and girls as ever, you know the drill. Please do let me know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMTsCryptidCrew. Now, if you're an aspiring writer, want to get in touch with me at the brand new contact email, which is, as on screen, contactthedeadone@gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. As ever, guys and girls, I hope you're all well and happy and trying to stay fit and focused. But above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.